Everybody loves a sequel more than the original. Right? That's how it works, right? No? Oh. Well, anyway, Overlord 2. It was developed by Triumph Studios and released in 2009, and as its predecessor was originally re-released in HD, and since I recently completed number 2 itself, I figured that a review was in order. Now excuse me as I summon my opinions and tell you guys my thoughts and experiences on this satirical RPG. Let's take a crack at it. Overlord 2 is, as I sort of mentioned if you were paying attention, an action RPG. It has a dark fantasy sort of setting set in... well, we're never actually given the name, to be honest, which is strange. But I feel like this is intentional, as both Overlord's games are known for taking gargantuan amounts of piss, but I'll talk more about that in a little bit. I do want to get the graphics out of the way first though. I typically don't bring them up, and for the most part this game does look good. It's got a nice balance of levels and it's all well lit and well designed, but sometimes the character motions could be off-putting and seem rather exaggerated at times. Even for 2009 it looks quite amateurish, but I'm not going to hold that against anybody. That aside, yeah, a lot of what this game gets right, it gets really right. Like the first game, this game is a satire of the whole dark fantasy anti-hero thing that was insanely popular at the time. Having said that, it is aware of its own silly nature, and it takes as many shots at itself as it does at the genres trying and succeeding to parody. Unlike the Mafia games, which are vaguely connected by their protagonists, in Overlord 2 you play as the child of the Overlord from the first game. There's also the fact that the first Overlord was trapped in an alternate dimension in a DLC expansion, but I do appreciate that this game lampshades that. At the start of the game you play as a equal wee baba Overlord, but then, soon you grow into a manly murderous Overlord. Oh god. The main goal for you in the game is to take down the, and this is their actual name, Glorious Empire, who are supposed to be the good guys, but the Empire ironically makes things a lot worse for their citizens. Isn't that oddly topical now that I think about it? You do technically play as the bad guy in this scenario, and as the game progresses you meet a variety of weird creatures and characters, get to make sexy time with some sexy mistresses, and ironically, save the world. But you're the bad guy. Duh, so let's talk more about that as we go over the characters. Effortless segue is effortless. As I mentioned a wee bit earlier, you play mainly as the titular Overlord. Not the same one from the first game, but still. The Overlord is a silent dominant force, and you spend almost all of your time playing as him going around killing, enthralling, or killing and then enthralling, or enthralling and then killing. And I'm not even close to making any of that up. Besides the Overlord and the aforementioned sexy mistresses are the sexy minions. They come in 4 different colours: brown, red, blue and green, but I'll talk more about those when I mention the gameplay. However, there are a couple of minions you don't really get to play as who are your mouthpiece, mostly Noel, who is your advisor as well as the game's narrator. Besides those are the more fantastical characters and the hilariously over-the-top evil villains who are pretty much all given British accents. I mean, most of the voice casts have British accents, but still. And I love it personally. I love that the characters, bad and good, are as ridiculous and fun as the story has a tendency to be. The main method of combat, for the most part, is walking around and attacking things with your axe, or in my case a bit later on in the game, a badass flaming sword. However, the melee combat is kind of repetitive and your basic magical attack can only do so much. But the focus in terms of the gameplay isn't what you make your Overlord do, but rather what you make your minions do. This is the game's unique selling point when it comes to its combat, and I can boil the terminology of it down to Pikmin for dickheads, or Dickmen if you will. You control the minions, each type with its own specific skill set. Browns are strong melee fighters, reds are archers, greens are assassins, and blues are healers who can resurrect fallen minions. It's a hell of a lot of fun having a massive army of minions to fight alongside with, especially when it comes to the great many puzzle areas that you're bound to bump into should you decide to play this game. But any issues they have regarding those puzzle sections are squashed by a minion killing a peacock and wearing its tail feathers as a hat. Another thing I'm not even close to making up. In terms of the game's storytelling, it's not the greatest. It is pretty by the numbers with its plot, the plot essentially just being you're a bad guy who just wants to murder and enslave, the good guys are somehow worse than you, but you're not hailed as a hero afterwards because satire oogle boogle. Sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't, and having a silent protagonist really doesn't help in that regard. Having said that, some of the dialogue in this game is absolutely bloody hilarious. Whether it was Noel's loading quotes, his in-game lines to generation. Okay, Noel carries this game mostly on his own, and he's got my favourite voice performance in the whole thing. Mistresses themselves actually have a lot of funny moments too, as do a lot of the villains, but Noel is my personal MVP of the game. So yes, the game may be oversimplified in its plot, and some of its jokes don't land quite as well as the writers were hoping, but most of the dialogue is funny, it's got a pretty fun minion controlling mechanic, and character models aside, the setting is actually quite nice to look at. It's nothing really as deep as Mafia 3 was when I was playing that game, but this one is still irreverent, silly, and not as mean-spirited as it could have wound up being. For my overall score, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I really like the unique gameplay mechanic even if the combat itself wasn't great, and while it does take a while to get to some points in the story, it's the dialogue and some of the smart writing that actually really helps that along. It's sort of like a game of two halves in a way, but the good half does outweigh the bad, so I think a 7 is a really good score for this. Anyway, that'll about do it. The next game review I'm going to be doing will probably be Yakuza 0. Spoiler alert, I liked a lot about that game, so I'm going to have a lot of fun writing that one up. The next video you'll see me for, or next thing you'll see me for, if I can get a rush job done, I'll probably be able to get the first episode of AVW vs PBW out tonight, although that's doubtful. I'm probably going to push that back to next Tuesday, but it will return. The next video then could be another episode of Catch Up Chaos tomorrow, or a new Fight of the Night this weekend. So, yeah, that's most likely what's next on my plate. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. You're awesome. Bye bye.